No, no, we are talking about Europe.
You wouldn't want to clear Poland's name?
I don't care about the public perception.
The EU is in crisis mode after Poland and Hungary vetoed the bloc's much-needed new budget and coronavirus recovery fund over a new rule to make access conditional on upholding core EU values. My guest this week here at the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum is Polish member of the EU Parliament, Ryszard Legutko from the Law and Justice Party. Can the Polish government afford to be at odds with the EU and its core values? Ryszard Legutko, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Good morning, very good morning to you. My pleasure being here.
The EU is said to be more than just a single market, but a union of values, including rule of law, freedom of democracy, respect for human rights. Poland signed up to those values when it voted to join the bloc back in 2004. But now you're willing to veto the budget over an accountability mechanism. So, you sign up to the values when you join the EU, but you don't want to be accountable for breaching them?
Well, that's not exactly like you said. First of all, veto is a legitimate instrument in the European law. Veto has been used or has been threatened to be used many times before. There is nothing extraordinary in the fact that this or that government is not very happy with the solution that is being proposed.
But I think that your EU partners would beg to differ on that, Mr. Legutko, and I'd just like to highlight some of what they have been saying actually about your actions. EU leaders say that the mechanism that they have put forward, for example, is about providing reliability and trust in the budget. For example, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, says that the EU will not water down the rule of law conditions. The EU is a community of values. An overwhelming majority, 25 of 27 EU member states, don't have a problem with that. Why is Poland the exception?
Well, let me say, if there is somebody who's acting against the rule of law, it is not the Polish government, it is the European Commission, and it is the European Parliament, or the majority of the European Council, and the German presidency included. The proposed rule of law mechanism is a blatant violation of the treaties. It's a shameless violation of the treaties. Article 2, which specifies the values of the European Union, should be respected by the European Union in the
But do you oppose it? But do you oppose it on a legal basis, or do you oppose it on a principles basis? Because ultimately, let's have a look, for example, at the concerns that have been raised by the Commission that they have been trying to take action on for years. For example, they've raised concern about various aspects of your justice reform, which began when your party came to power. They have raised concerns for judicial independence. They've launched multiple infringement proceedings. In 2017, it even launched Article 7 proceedings against Poland for clear risk of a serious breach of rule of law by Poland. The independence of the court is, of course, a cornerstone of rule of law. You're facing some really serious accusations, concerns that your party is taking over the body that selects new judges, appointing close allies to the Constitutional Tribunal, attempting to purge the Supreme Court and regional courts. You don't want to face accountability over those accusations? You wouldn't want to clear Poland's name?
That's not true what you are saying. That's not a fair description of what has been happening in Poland. That's not a fair description of the reform of the judiciary system. Let me say that the treaties specify only one way of accountability, that is Article 7. And that's all there is to it. Article 7. Any other tampering with the conflicts and making non-elected body like the European Commission highly biased politically to prosecute, to judge, and to be the executioner over the independent state, this is simply outrageous.
You keep focusing on the mechanisms, but let's talk about the substance of what is happening in Poland.
I want to finish the argument. In 2014, when for the first time there was this idea of the rule of law mechanism, the legal services of the European Council rejected it, saying that there is no legal basis whatsoever. It's in conflict with Article 5, the principle of the conferral, the Article 5 of the Treaty of European Union. That is, the European Commission and all European institutions have only those competences that were conferred upon them explicitly. And monitoring the judiciary system is not the competence of the European Union.
So you don't want anyone to pay attention to what is... it seems you don't want anyone to pay attention to what is going on in Poland, but I'd just like to highlight this one example for you and get your response to it, because your government established a disciplinary chamber which has the power to punish judges over court rulings. The judges have been appointed by your party's leadership. You have, in a landmark ruling just this past spring by the European Court of Justice, they've criticized this body heavily. They have said that it is not an independent court. They've ordered its suspension. Furthermore, your country has passed what has become known as a muzzle law, which can be used to reprimand judges who call into question how fellow judges were appointed. In other words, your judicial reforms. Explain to me how disciplining or throwing out judges critical of your reforms creates an independent judiciary in the country.
I think what you said is the best basis of why we do not want this mechanism to go into effect. It's not only that it's the violation of the rule of law, but it's based on lies or misinformation or disinformation. The disciplinary chamber does not discipline judges for their rulings.
That is not what an independent Polish Judges Association has said. That is not what Freedom House has said. They've said dozens of judges are facing possible penalties on often frivolous grounds. The Judges Association says disciplinary actions took place after prosecutors and judges criticized, questioned, or appeared to negatively comment on the controversial justice reforms. They even cited somebody who was reprimanded for wearing a T-shirt, which simply said an inscription, Constitution. How is that democratic?
This is not true. Just why are you quoting me all those negative opinions? I can quote to you positive opinions. Just show me the text of this piece of legislation, the number of the article or paragraph, when it says explicitly that the judges will be punished or may be punished for the rulings. It's not there. The disciplinary chamber is occupied with the cases of a judge stealing something from a supermarket, or the judge that was caught drunk driving. So that's misinformation number one. Misinformation number two is that the European Court of Justice, I'm setting aside the problem whether the European Court of Justice is entitled to deal with something that is not its competence, but that's a different matter, did not suspend the disciplinary chamber. What it suspended or put interim measures, to be precise on, was just one small thing related to the question that was being asked: disciplinary actions against judges.
You say that it's an opinion,
Not
but I'd like to highlight it's also the public perception in your country that the independence of the Polish
I don't
judiciary.
care about the public.
You don't care about the public. You're not a Democrat.
I don't care about the public perception, because the public
They
perception,
say that since you have instituted these reforms,
when it's based on, I beg your pardon, I missed the question once again.
Their confidence in the judicial system has decreased by 11 percentage points since you came into power, since you started implementing these reforms. That's dramatic.
I haven't got the faintest idea about the data, or what the data you take from. I have a different data. The confidence in the judiciary system in Poland has been all times low. That's why we decided to make the reform. So first of all, let me say this is our problem. This is an internal problem of Poland. I'm not interfering with the judiciary system in Germany. There's a lot what I don't like in judiciary system in Germany, but that's not my problem.
We're talking about Poland, though, and the message that I seem to be getting from you is that you believe that your courts are absolutely and completely independent. So then let me put it to you and ask you, why would the head of Law and Justice say the following? He said, quote, "The reforms to the Constitutional Court were needed to ensure there were no legal blocks on government policies aimed at creating a fairer economy." He basically admitted your party does not want the courts to get in the way of what it wants. In other words, eliminate the judiciary's check on law and justice's power.
Well, I will not comment on this. I want you to tell me if there is anything in the system actually existing that subverts independence of judges. They cannot be dismissed. They cannot be accountable for the ruling. They are not responsible politically. I mean, where's this dependence? I can't see any reasons. I know that the whole problem with the Constitutional Court started when the previous government, Donald Tusk's government, or his followers, appointed or filled 5 vacancies in advance. So they had the majority of the judges who might block the policy of the next government. That was even before the elections.
Let's concentrate on the situation right now, and I'd like to move on to one other very important pillar of democracy, and that is a free press, providing an essential check on power, in fact. Days after the election in July, in your country, a new media strategy of, quote, repolonization, limiting foreign investors in Polish media, and deconcentration, limiting the number of media outlets that any one group can own, was announced. Reporters Without Borders says the real goal is to influence the editorial policies of the media. Why should anyone believe that this isn't just an attempt by your party to tighten its grip?
The media in Poland are the most diverse media in entire Europe. Certainly, there is more plurality in Polish media than in France, in Germany, in Belgium. In most of these countries, the media are of one opinion. In Poland, there is a wide spectrum of media. That's point number one. Point number two is that in some areas, about 80% of the media is owned by foreign companies. We don't think it's good, and there are countries in Europe which do not tolerate it either.
If that is true, let's look at what happens when your government gets involved in the media, for example, the public media. In 2015, your party passed legislation that allows the government to appoint or dismiss the executives in charge of public TV and the radio broadcaster. The OSCE has said now it fails to ensure editorial independence. It said that the public broadcaster, for example, in the most recent election, failed in its legal duty to provide balanced and impartial coverage. Rather, it served as a campaign tool for the incumbents. Critics say the public media has become a mouthpiece of your government. Is that what the country now has to look forward to under repolonization of the private media?
There is as much truth in it as it was about your comment on the judiciary system. It's all based on disinformation.
It's based on data from the OSCE. It is based on data from Reporters Without Borders.
Look, the public media from the very beginning, that is from 1989, the public media was rather supportive of the governments, whatever the governments were. There was, whether they were the communists or liberals or whatever. So there is nothing strange about it. The public media in most European countries, if there are public media, also supportive of the government, which does not mean that they are not objective or they are not impartial. If you look at the media now in Poland, about 70% of the media are anti-government and 30% are supportive.
And by that you mean independent, for example.
And even that is regarded as too much and it's been an object of a vicious attack. Do you want Poland to become like France, for example, when there is only one opinion and all media
again, Mr. Legutko, we're talking about Poland here.
And it's also the opinion of the government. No, we are talking about Europe.
I would like to move on to another issue. Let's talk about a domestic issue, women's reproductive rights. Your country has seen its biggest protests in recent years, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets after the Constitutional Tribunal said it would outlaw abortions in cases of severe fetal abnormalities. It's come under fire not only because of its substance, but also because of the way that it was reached. Your party pushed this measure through, or tried to push this measure through the parliament years ago, but it was very unpopular. So now it's going through the courts. You've come under fire for a lack of a democratic conversation on the issue. Did you think that you could just let this slip through?
This is the entirely national matter. Moral issues are not the question of European legislation. That's number one. I mean, let's agree on that. You may dislike it, but it's not your business. First of all, I do not know what women's rights are. You cannot find women's rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There is nothing about
well, women's rights are human rights, Mr. Legutko, are they not?
Women's rights are not in the European Convention of Human Rights. Women's rights are not in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Can you show me a single paragraph when there is something about women's rights in these three basic documents?
Let's bring it back to what's happening, though.
There is nothing there. There is nothing there, women's rights. So I do not know exactly what it is. When we talk about abortion is not a question of the European or international law.
But I'm talking about the democratic process in your country on this issue. Approval for your government is dropping dramatically. As we mentioned, protesters on the streets, your government has not published the ruling, which would bring back in force. That's according to polling data from Cantor in the past couple of weeks. The government appears to be stalling when it comes to implementing the decision. Was it a huge mistake, and are you backtracking?
If you are resistant to accept information, I really cannot talk with you because it makes no sense. my point was that even if you dislike this law, it's not your problem, okay? It's not your problem, and it's not a legal problem. It's a moral problem. The verdict was announced by the Constitutional Tribunal. I thought the ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal should be respected, but apparently not. Some rulings can be accepted and other rulings must not be accepted. So let's be consistent.
Mr. Legutko,
are the rulings of the Constitutional Tribunal to be respected or not?
How about...
Don't tell me that some can be and others cannot be. I want to see the argument that refutes the reasoning behind, the legal argument that refutes the reasoning behind this ruling. Let me tell you that the previous presidents of the Constitutional Tribunal, well, roughly agreed with this ruling because the ruling couldn't be different.
Mr. Legutko, I want to get
to the tradition of rulings
again, we're talking about the democratic process, and I want to get to one more issue before we have to go.
The European Commission can go bananas, but they cannot change it. This is in accordance with the Polish law and the Polish constitution.
Okay.
Any other
Mr.
ruling
Legutko,
would be tampering with the constitution.
Mr. Legutko, how about the rights of LGBT people also in your country? President Duda has called the LGBT movement an ideology more dangerous than communism. Ahead of the election, he signed a family charter of proposals, including pledges to prevent gay couples from marrying or adopting children and to ban teaching about LGBT issues in school. The human rights of LGBT people in Poland, do they not matter?
Well, it's the same story over and over again. I mean, the conversation has absolutely no sense because what you are throwing at me are all those half-truths or untruths or cliches, and I would have to.
Okay, well, how about the words of politicians that are in your Law and Justice Party? For example, your now education minister said on the campaign trail, stop listening to this idiocy about human rights or equality. These people, and by these people he means LGBT people, are not equal to normal people. He said it. That's shocking.
No, he didn't. I mean, again, it's out of the context. It was, first of all, can you give me a single example of a homosexual person who has been persecuted or discriminated against because he is a homosexual or she is a homosexual?
Well, you have about
a single example.
Mr. Legutko, you have about 100 towns and regions across Poland, nearly a third of the country, that have passed resolutions declaring them free of LGBT ideology. You're clashing with the EU because you have the Ursula von der Leyen saying LGBT-free zones are humanity-free zones. They have no place in our union. Isn't your government's duty to stop and ensure the safety of all of its citizens, including minorities? Isn't that what fundamental values are for?
This is becoming more and more hopeless. We've been reiterating several times, there are no LGBT-free zones in Poland. European Parliament has passed dozens of resolutions against LGBT-free zones in Poland. Ursula von der Leyen condemned LGBT-free zones in Poland. Read my lips, there are no LGBT-free zones in Poland. How can why is it so difficult for you guys to accept a simple fact? What is the problem? The problem is, the only thing that happened was that one of the LGBT activists took pictures, which he sort of made up, right, and distributed all around. And then
Mr. Legutko?
In the international media, you could see this is LGBT from zone.
Mr. Legutko?
Then he explained it was an artistic performance.
Mr. Legutko,
now you are accusing me and my government because of this artistic performance?
Briefly before we go, I'd like to ask you, we've addressed protests on the street. We've talked about how Poland is at odds with the EU over values. And just briefly tell us, are you concerned that your government is putting Poland on the path to isolation?
I'm concerned about the European Union, which is suffering from a serious disease, probably a deadly disease, which is called tyranny of the majority. And the EU has becoming more and more closed and tyrannical, intolerant, systemically violating its own values and its own treaties, and trying to impose some kind of new despotism. I'm very concerned about it.
We have to leave it there. Ryszard Legutko, thank you for joining us on Conflict Zone.
Thank you.